Gridlock. It's a word that evokes images of frustration and paralysis. For Congress, gridlock has increasingly become business as usual. Partisanship and deep ideological polarization have stymied efforts to find compromise and solve the nation's most pressing problems. Here with me today to discuss the gridlock dilemma is Sarah Bender, professor of political science at Columbia College and a senior fellow in governance studies at the Brookings Institute. She specializes in the study of Congress, political parties, and the causes and consequences of legislative gridlock. Welcome, Sarah.
Great, thanks for having me.
Sarah, let's start by defining legislative gridlock. How would you define it, and why do you find this topic so intriguing?
Well, when we're thinking about legislative stalemate or gridlock, we have in mind a sense that there are big things on the congressional agenda. Global warming, immigration, tax reform, entitlement reform, big things on the agenda, but they don't get done. And that's our sense of paralysis or stalemate, right? Things our majorities agree should at least be talked about, and yet at the end of the day, at the end of the Congress, there's been no progress. Why do I study it? Oh, oddly enough, I wrote a book almost 15 years ago about legislative gridlock, right? Why is sometimes Congress remarkably productive, the Great Society, the New Deal, and why other times is it mired in gridlock, right? The 1990s of Clinton and the Republican Congress. Little did I know, that was nothing. That was small potatoes compared to the gridlock that we've seen today. So it's interesting to me why we see increasing levels of gridlock and why has it become such a problem around Congress's neck.
This is absolutely fascinating. I must ask, is the level of gridlock worse than ever, basically because based on the number of laws that are passed and the legislation that has been enacted?
Well, there are two ways to think about that question. One is a big historical view, and one is more sort of recent contemporary Congresses. In the big historical view, right, today's Congress is, yeah, we shut the government down, we nearly default on the debt, but it ain't the Civil War, right? And so I think it's always important to keep in mind when we talk about unprecedented stalemate, we've seen a lot worse historically, and we never want to we don't want to go back there. Having said that, so I have a measure of deadlock, right? What are the big issues on the agenda from the 40s to the present, and what percent were deadlocked at the end of the Congress? And if you look at that measure, over time goes up and down, but incrementally goes up, and then when we reach the last Congress, 70% deadlock of the big issues of the day, and that actually is unprecedented, right? We see variation over time, but something is off kilter in the extent to which these parties find themselves unable to come to the table.
So Sarah, clearly we've had a government shutdown. So what do you see are the long-term consequences of gridlock?
Well, I think there are a number of reasons why we should care about Congress's inability to govern here or the difficulties it faces. First of all, just as from a micro level, if you're sitting in the Department of Transportation and you want to be able to plan your budget, you can't. Right? And from year to year, we might think that government would work better if they could see the long term. And clearly they can't if they can't count on budgets going up and they can't even estimate, right, what a budget's going to look like. So that's a problem. Second, in a policy world, right, there are big problems that get worse by not addressing them. And certainly climate change, global warming, that's like a prime example. You don't address it now, fine. But problem gets worse and worse, and it gets worse and worse because you aren't taking any steps. At least that's what the scientists tell us. And third, from a democratic perspective, right, public confidence in Congress is really low. I think the number is 9%, 10%. And as some people joke, like, those are the folks who work on the Hill, or my brother, right? There's such low approval of Congress that is problematic in a democratic political system where we count on people supporting our political institutions.
Based on your research, what is at the root of legislative stalemate? Is it partisanship?
Well, there are a couple issues here, and we see them historically over a long period. First of all, party control, right? Sometimes we have divided government. One party gets the White House, the other party gets the Congress. Sometimes they split the Congress. Sometimes it's unified party control. So the first 2 years of the Obama administration, large Democratic majorities, just like we had in the New Deal, just like we had in the Great Society, and party control makes a difference, right? Parties can unite on policy grounds and on electoral grounds, and they make things happen. That's the first problem. Second, we have a problem with bicameralism, right? Baked into the system, but sometimes the House and Senate see eye to eye. Sometimes they really don't. And clearly the last two Congresses with a Republican House and a Democratic Senate, that's a stumbling block. And it's Obviously, that's constitutional, right? We have two chambers, but it makes coming to the table really, really hard. And third, the overwhelming reason here is we have the polarization of the two political parties, right? Something that we haven't seen like this in probably a good 30, 40 years. And that makes finding common, shared ideological ground, right? There is no shared ground. And in the absence of that overlap between the party, right? Lots of Democrats who are liberals and conservatives, lots of Republicans who are liberals and conservatives. We don't have that. Right? We have liberal Democrats, conservative Republicans, and that makes it very hard. Right? First, because they don't agree, and second of all, it's party competition. Right? I'm not going to agree. I'm not going to endorse that because that party endorsed it. And so some of this is just strategic. Right? Nobody wants a half a loaf. Nobody wants to compromise. People prefer to hold off for the whole loaf when they control all of government. That's a recipe for stalemate.
Is there any way we can break through gridlock?
So there are a number of ways to think about this. First, large-scale electoral change. One party gains control, House, Senate, and White House. That will unstick a little bit of the logjam, right? Just in part because the parties then know this is our chance to get done what we want to do, and then let voters, right, cast judgment on it 2 or 4 years later. So one possibility is big electoral change. Second possibility, I'm a little less sanguine about this. Second is that some issue comes through that cuts the parties, right? And we've seen it historically, whether it was slavery or whether it was the Great Society, right? There are issues here that could come. Immigration reform, possibly. I think most people are kind of skeptical that the two parties would ever, right, be able to come to the center. The third way to think about it, though, is that members do make progress on issues despite polarization, right? But they have to have a reason to come to the table, right? Government shutdown, right? What ended it? Republicans had their tail between their legs because of the public opinion. Public said, you're to blame. And when one party wins that messaging battle, parties come to the table. And that's not a very hopeful or sort of pragmatic way of thinking about things, but it is what gets the job done, right? It gives both parties an incentive to come to the table, even when there's not a lot of overlap between the parties.
Well, legislative gridlock is certainly a topic that we care about because of its impact on our daily lives. Thank you, Sarah, for being with us today and for sharing with us this incredible research. Thank you.
Oh, sure. Thanks very much for having me.